On the day he thought he would finally prove to the world that he had upgraded, something happened that froze the entire wedding. The massive iron gates swung open with a slow, deliberate creak, and every head turned toward the entrance. What rolled through those gates wasn't just a car, it was a sleek, midnight black limousine, polished to perfection, gleaming under the afternoon sun like something out of a dream. Or a nightmare. The engine purred softly as it came to a stop right in front of the reception lawn. For a moment, no one moved. No one even breathed. Then the driver stepped out, walked around, and opened the rear door. And the woman who emerged, the woman he once called useless, the woman he swore would never amount to anything, stepped out with 3 children, 3 identical children. And every single one of them looked exactly like him. The groom's face drained of all color, his knees buckled slightly. Somewhere in the crowd, a glass shattered against the ground. His bride turned to him, her eyes wide with confusion and rising panic. But what no one in that garden knew, what no one could have predicted, was that this moment wasn't an accident. It wasn't revenge. It was something far deeper. It was the reckoning of a man who thought he could outrun his past. And today, that past had pulled up in a limousine, dressed better than anyone at his wedding, and carrying the truth he tried so desperately to bury. So how did we get here? How did a wedding that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of a man's so-called success turn into the most humiliating moment of his life? Why would Daniel, a man who spent years building his image, invite the ex-wife he abandoned to his wedding? And more importantly, why did Miriam, the woman everyone believed was struggling to survive, arrive in a limousine with 3 children no one knew existed? Who are these children? Where has Miriam been all these years? And why does it feel like this entire day was orchestrated not by him, but by something much bigger? What happened between the day he left her broken in that apartment and the day she showed up at his wedding looking like royalty? And here's the question that's going to haunt you. Was this justice, fate, or something even more calculated? Stick around, because the answers to these questions will shake you to your core. Let me take you back. Back to a time when Daniel wasn't the polished, confident man standing at that altar. Back when he was just a guy trying to survive, living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment with Miriam, the woman he promised to love forever. They met in college. She was studying to be a teacher. He was working part-time at a warehouse while juggling night classes in business administration. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and for a while that was enough. Miriam was the kind of woman who believed in people. She believed in Daniel even when he didn't believe in himself. When he lost his job, she took on extra shifts at the diner where she waitressed. When he talked about giving up on his dreams, she stayed up with him until 3 in the morning, rewriting his resume, encouraging him, telling him he was capable of more. She cooked meals out of almost nothing, turning rice and canned vegetables into something that felt like home. She wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years straight. She never complained. Not once. But somewhere along the way, Daniel started to change. He got a new job at a mid-level marketing firm, then a promotion, then another one. Suddenly, he was making connections, attending networking events, rubbing shoulders with people who wore expensive watches and drove cars he used to only see in magazines. And the more success he tasted, the more ashamed he became of where he came from. He started looking at Miriam differently, not with love, with irritation, with embarrassment. He noticed the way her hands were rough from years of hard work, the way she didn't know which fork to use at the company dinners, the way she laughed too loudly when she was nervous. Things that used to make her beautiful to him now made him cringe. One night, after a company dinner where his colleagues had made subtle jokes about his wife's outdated dress and simple jewelry, Daniel came home and said the words that would destroy everything. "You're holding me back, Miriam. I need someone who fits the life I'm building. I need someone who can keep up with where I'm going." Miriam stood there in their tiny kitchen, a dish towel still in her hands, staring at him like she'd been struck. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "I'm saying it's over. I want a divorce." She didn't cry, not at first. She just looked at him with this expression of complete disbelief, like she was waiting for him to laugh and tell her it was a cruel joke. But he didn't laugh. He just turned away and walked into the bedroom, leaving her standing there alone. And just like that, he filed for divorce. No discussion, no attempt to fix things, no acknowledgement of everything she had sacrificed for him, just cold, calculated abandonment. Miriam didn't fight him. She signed the papers in silence, packed a single suitcase with whatever fit, and walked out of his life on a rainy Tuesday morning. And then she disappeared. Completely. No one heard from her. Not her friends, not her distant family members. Rumors spread through their old social circle like wildfire. Some said she moved back to her hometown somewhere in the Midwest. Others whispered that she was living in a women's shelter, broken and defeated by what Daniel had done to her. A few people claimed they'd seen her working at a grocery store, looking tired and worn down. Daniel didn't care. He moved on almost immediately. Within 3 months, he was dating a woman named Vanessa, the daughter of a prominent businessman who owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. She was everything Miriam wasn't: polished, connected, expensive. The kind of woman who knew exactly which champagne to order and could talk about art in European vacations without missing a beat. And when Daniel proposed to her on a yacht in front of 50 of their closest friends, complete with a violinist and a photographer capturing every moment, he felt like he had finally arrived, like he'd shed his old skin and become someone new, someone better. But here's the thing about Daniel. He wasn't just satisfied with success. He needed validation. He needed people to see how far he'd risen. He needed witnesses to his transformation. And in his twisted mind, he came up with a plan that he thought was genius. He would invite Miriam to his wedding, not out of kindness, not out of any remaining affection, out of pure, calculated cruelty. He wanted her to see what she had lost. He wanted her to stand there in whatever cheap dress she could afford, probably bought from a thrift store, and watch him marry someone better. Someone worthy of the life he was building. It was the ultimate power move, the final proof that leaving her was the right decision, or so he thought. What Daniel didn't understand was that humiliation only works on people who care what you think, and Miriam had long stopped caring. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The wedding was perfect. At least that's what everyone kept saying. The venue was a sprawling garden estate just outside the city, the kind of place that cost more to rent for a day than most people make in a year. White roses lined every pathway, their petals almost glowing in the afternoon light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the trees, catching the sun and throwing little rainbows across the manicured lawn. A string quartet played softly near the fountain, classical music floating through the air like something out of a fairy tale. Guests sipped champagne from crystal flutes and complimented the bride's custom designer gown, which reportedly cost more than a small car. Daniel stood at the altar feeling like a king. This was his moment, his victory lap. The culmination of years of climbing, networking, and carefully crafting his image. And buried somewhere in the back rows of guests, according to his plan, would be Miriam. Small, invisible, humiliated, a living reminder of what he'd escaped from. Except she wasn't there yet. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Vows were exchanged, carefully rehearsed and perfectly delivered. Rings were placed on fingers. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. But as they moved into the reception, Daniel kept glancing toward the entrance, his jaw tight with anticipation. Where was she? He had sent the invitation weeks ago, deliberately casual in its tone, with a handwritten note that said, "Miriam, I'd love for you to be there to celebrate this new chapter. No hard feelings. I hope life has treated you well." It was bait, perfectly crafted bait, and he was certain she'd take it. What woman could resist the chance to see her ex-husband, even if it meant reopening old wounds? What broke, struggling woman would pass up the free food and the chance to remember what she'd lost? Then, just as the first dance was about to begin, just as Daniel was starting to think maybe she hadn't come after all, one of the ushers approached him. The young man looked uneasy, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Sir, there's someone at the gate. She says she was invited." Daniel's heart skipped. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but inside he was smirking. He could already picture her standing there. maybe in some ill-fitting dress she'd borrowed, clutching a cheap purse, feeling out of place among all this wealth and elegance. Perfect. Let her in. The usher nodded and hurried away. Daniel turned to Vanessa, who was adjusting her veil and laughing with her bridesmaids. She looked at him with those bright, trusting eyes. "Who is it, honey?" "Just someone from my past," he said smoothly, reaching out to touch her arm. "I wanted to show her I've moved on, that we all move on." Vanessa's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, but she nodded. "Okay, if it's important to you." The music continued. Guests laughed and clinked glasses. Children ran between the tables, their laughter mixing with the sound of the string quartet. And then the gates opened. The low hum of an engine made a few heads turn. At first, people thought it was just another late guest, maybe someone stuck in traffic. But when the limousine rolled into view, sleek and imposing, and utterly out of place in the way it commanded attention, the entire atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just any limousine. It was the kind you see celebrities step out of at red carpet events. Long, pristine. The windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Phones came out. People instinctively reaching to capture whatever was about to happen. And Daniel, standing near the head table with a champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips, felt his stomach drop like a stone. "That's not possible," he whispered to himself. The driver stepped out first, a professional in a crisp uniform. He moved to the back door with practiced precision and opened it with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for diplomats or movie stars. And then she stepped out, Miriam. But not the Miriam he remembered. Not the tired, worn-down woman who used to shuffle around their apartment in old slippers, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, shoulders hunched from exhaustion. This Miriam wore a tailored cream suit that fit her like it was made by hand, probably because it was. The fabric caught the light as she moved. Her hair was styled elegantly, falling in soft waves around her face. She wore minimal jewelry, just a simple gold necklace and matching earrings, but they looked expensive, real. Her posture was straight, confident. She moved like someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. And behind her, stepping out one by one with the help of the driver, were 3 children. 3 boys, maybe 4 years old, dressed in matching little navy suits with crisp white shirts. And every single one of them had Daniel's face. His eyes, that specific shade of hazel, his nose slightly upturned at the tip, his exact jawline, even at that young age. It was undeniable, unmistakable, impossible to explain away. The crowd gasped. The sound rippled through the reception like a wave. Someone dropped a plate, the crash echoing across the suddenly silent garden. A woman in the front row put her hand over her mouth. Another guest pulled out their phone and started recording. Vanessa turned to Daniel, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Daniel, who are they?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through him like a knife. But Daniel couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He was frozen, his mind racing, trying to piece together a timeline that didn't make sense. Trying to find an explanation that would make this go away. Trying to deny what his eyes and everyone else's eyes were clearly seeing. Trying to find a way out of the trap that had just sprung shut around him with the precision of a steel jaw. Miriam walked forward slowly, her heels clicking softly against the stone pathway. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't angry. She was calm, terrifyingly calm. The kind of calm that comes from someone who holds all the cards and knows it. The 3 boys held her hands, 2 on one side, 1 on the other, looking around with wide, curious eyes at all the decorations and the well-dressed strangers staring at them. Guests whispered frantically to each other, leaning in close, hands cupped over mouths. "Is that his ex-wife? Are those his kids? Did you know about this? Does the bride know? Oh my God, look at those children. They look exactly like him. This is insane. Someone needs to record this." Vanessa grabbed Daniel's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of his expensive suit. "Daniel, answer me right now. Who is she? Why is she here? And who are those children?" He finally found his voice, though it came out weak and shaky, nothing like the confident tone he'd used during his vows just an hour earlier. That's Miriam, my ex-wife. Vanessa's eyes widened, her face going from pale to flushed with anger and confusion. Your ex-wife? The one you said was nobody? The one you said you barely remembered? Why is she here, Daniel? And the children? Her voice was rising now, drawing even more attention. I don't know, he lied. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew no one believed him. Not Vanessa, not the guests. Not even himself. Because the truth was written all over those three little faces staring up at him with innocent curiosity. Miriam stopped a few feet away from the head table, right in the center of the reception area, where everyone could see her clearly. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, letting the silence do the work, letting every eye in that garden fall on her, on the children, on Daniel, letting the weight of the moment settle over everyone like a heavy blanket. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the silent crowd with perfect clarity. Hello, Daniel. Congratulations on your wedding. It's a beautiful ceremony. Everything looks very expensive. Very impressive. He swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the champagne he'd been drinking all afternoon. Miriam. I didn't think you'd actually come. You invited me, didn't you? She tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Or was that invitation not sincere? Was it just for show? The crowd was dead silent now, every ear straining to hear every word. Daniel forced a smile, trying desperately to regain some control of the situation, to salvage something from this disaster. Of course it was sincere. I'm glad you're doing well. I mean, clearly you're doing well. That's a nice car. She nodded slowly. I am doing well. Better than I ever imagined, actually. Better than I thought possible during those nights I spent crying in our old apartment after you left. Remember those nights, Daniel? His smile faltered. The guest shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's grip on his arm tightened even more. Miriam continued, her voice still calm, still measured. I thought it was only right to bring your sons to meet you. After all, they've been asking about their father for quite some time now, and I figured what better occasion than your wedding? What better time for them to see the man who gave them life? The word hit like a bomb. Sons. Your sons. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, a small sob escaping. The bride's mother stood up from her chair, her face twisted in shock and barely contained fury. Daniel's father, sitting near the front, closed his eyes and shook his head slowly, as if he'd known all along that something like this would eventually catch up with his son. Daniel's business partner, standing by the bar, set down his drink and stared. And Daniel? Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him, felt everything he'd built start to crumble in real time. Those aren't my kids, he said, his voice rising in desperation, cracking slightly on the last word. We've been divorced for years. I don't know what game you're playing, Miriam, but this isn't the time or place. This is my wedding. You have no right to come here and make accusations. Miriam's expression didn't change. Her voice remained steady. No, Daniel, this is exactly the time, and exactly the place. Because you brought me here to humiliate me, didn't you? You didn't invite me out of kindness. You invited me because you wanted me to see your success. You wanted me to feel small. You wanted all these people to see the poor girl you left behind so they could congratulate you on your upgrade. But the truth is, you're the one who's been small all along, the crowd murmured. Some people nodded. Others looked at Daniel with new eyes. Seeing him differently now, Vanessa was crying openly, mascara running down her face. One of the little boys, the one in the middle, tugged on Miriam's hand. Mommy, is that him? Is that our daddy? The question broke something in the crowd. A few women covered their mouths. One man shook his head in disgust. Another whispered to his wife, we should leave. Miriam knelt down gracefully, her outfit somehow not wrinkling, and kissed the top of the boy's head. Yes, sweetheart, that's him. The boy looked at Daniel with big, innocent eyes, the kind of eyes that see right through adult complications and just want simple answers. Why doesn't he live with us? Why didn't he come to my birthday? The questions hit harder than any accusation Miriam could have made. They were innocent, honest, Devastating. Vanessa turned to Daniel, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me right now, Daniel. Look me in the eyes and tell me those aren't your children. But Daniel had no words left. His hands were shaking. His carefully constructed world was falling apart piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Because deep down, in the part of him he'd been trying to bury for years, trying to ignore with expensive suits and exclusive parties, and a new wife who fit his image, he knew. He knew exactly when it happened. He knew the timeline. He knew that the math added up perfectly, and he knew that there was no way out of this. Miriam stood back up, smoothing her outfit, and looked out at the crowd of stunned faces. Then she looked back at Daniel. Let me tell you all a story. A story about a woman who gave everything to a man who gave her nothing in return. A story some of you might find familiar. When Daniel left me 5 years ago, I was 2 months pregnant. I didn't know it yet. I found out exactly 1 week after the divorce was finalized. I was sitting in that tiny apartment we used to share, the one with the leaky faucet Daniel never fixed, and the heater that only worked half the time. And I took a pregnancy test because I'd been feeling sick for days. And when I saw those 2 lines, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried for 3 hours straight. Not because I didn't want children, I'd always wanted to be a mother, but because I was alone, completely alone, and I was terrified. The crowd was hanging on every word now. No one moved, no one even seemed to breathe. Miriam's voice remained steady, but there was emotion underneath it now, carefully controlled, but unmistakably real. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I called again the next day. He didn't answer. I called 5 more times over the next week. Finally, his new number was disconnected, or he'd blocked me. I don't know which. I thought about tracking him down at his office, but I had some pride left. Not much, but some. So I decided that if he didn't want to be part of my life, if he'd made it that clear that I was disposable, then I wouldn't force him. I would raise my child on my own. Except then I found out at my first ultrasound that it wasn't 1 child. It was 3. Triplets. The doctor said it so casually, like it was good news. Congratulations, you're having triplets. And I remember thinking, how am I going to survive this? I was working 2 jobs and could barely afford to feed myself. She paused, letting that sink in. But here's what Daniel didn't know. Here's what none of you knew. A few months after he left, when I was about 5 months pregnant and starting to show, I met someone, not a romantic partner, a mentor. Her name was Dr. Elena Hartman. Some of you might know the name. She's a venture capitalist and philanthropist who runs several nonprofits across the country. I met her at a free prenatal clinic where I was getting checkups because I couldn't afford regular doctor visits. She was there volunteering, and she saw me sitting in the waiting room, visibly pregnant, trying not to cry while I filled out financial assistance forms. She sat down next to me and asked if I was okay. And for some reason, I told her everything. About Daniel. About the divorce. About how scared I was. About how I didn't know if I could do this alone. Miriam's eyes glistened slightly, but she didn't cry. And Dr. Hartman looked at me and said something I'll never forget. She said, "Being left doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you were too valuable for someone who couldn't see what they had." She gave me her card and told me to call her. And I did. And she changed my life. She helped me get into a program for single mothers starting businesses. She connected me with resources, with childcare, with education. She saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself anymore. She gave me a chance when the world felt like it had given up on me. And over the next 4 years, while I was raising 3 boys on my own, while I was feeding them and changing diapers and staying up all night when they were sick, I was also building something. I started a consulting firm focused on helping small businesses optimize their operations. It started small, just me and a laptop working during nap times and after bedtime. But it grew. The crowd was completely absorbed now. Even the children had stopped running around. Everyone was listening. And now, 4 years later, my firm has 32 employees. We work with companies across 15 states. Last year, we cleared 7 figures in revenue. And next month, I'm opening a second office in Chicago. I didn't come here today to beg, Daniel. I didn't come here for money or sympathy or to ask you to be a father. I came here because your mother reached out to me. The crowd gasped again. Heads swiveled toward Daniel's mother, who sat quietly in her chair near the front, her face unreadable, her hands folded in her lap. Vanessa's face went white. You knew? Her voice was barely audible. You knew about this and you didn't tell me? You knew about those children? Daniel turned to his mother, betrayal written all over his face. Mom, what did you do? Daniel's mother finally stood up, her posture rigid, her voice cold and clear. I did what you should have done years ago. I told the truth. She looked at Vanessa with something like pity. I tried to tell you what kind of man my son was. I tried to warn you before you married him, but you were so in love with the image, with the lifestyle, that you didn't want to hear it. I told you he'd been married before. I told you it didn't end well, but you didn't ask questions. You didn't want to know. So I invited Miriam myself. I found her through a mutual friend. I asked her to come because I wanted my son to face what he'd done, and I wanted you to see who you were really marrying before it was too late. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, her perfect wedding shattered into 1,000 pieces, her whole world turning upside down in real time. Her bridesmaids rushed to her side, but she pushed them away, sobbing into her hands. But Miriam wasn't done. She turned back to Daniel, and her voice was softer now, but somehow more powerful. These boys are yours, Daniel. They have your DNA, your smile, your stubbornness, your laugh, though they've never heard yours. And one day, probably soon, they're going to ask me why their father wasn't there, why he didn't come to their birthday parties or their first day of school, why he doesn't call or visit, and I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm not going to lie to protect you. I'm going to tell them that you chose pride over love, that you chose image over integrity, that you chose a lifestyle over your own children, and that you lost everything because of it. Daniel's hands were shaking uncontrollably now. His voice came out as a broken whisper. I didn't know, Miriam. I swear I didn't know. You didn't want to know, she said firmly. There's a difference. You blocked my calls. You changed your number. You made yourself unreachable because you didn't want anything from your old life touching your new one. So don't stand there and pretend you're a victim. And with that, Miriam took a deep breath, looked around at the stunned crowd one last time, and turned around. She took her sons by the hands, each small hand gripping hers tightly, and began walking back toward the limousine. The crowd parted like water before them. No one tried to stop her. No one said a word. Some people looked down, ashamed. Others watched with open admiration. One older woman whispered to her husband, "Good for her." The boys looked back once, confused by all the attention, by the crying lady in the white dress, by the man who was supposed to be their father but looked like a stranger. But Miriam kept walking, dignified, unbroken, head held high. She helped each boy back into the limousine, buckling them in carefully, kissing each forehead. Then she climbed in herself. The driver closed the door with a soft click, and without another word, the limousine pulled away, gliding back through those iron gates and disappearing down the tree-lined drive. And Daniel watched it go, standing there in his expensive suit at his expensive wedding, surrounded by expensive decorations and expensive guests, feeling like the poorest man in the world. The wedding never recovered. Within 15 minutes of Miriam's departure, Vanessa's family began packing up. Her father, red-faced and furious, grabbed Daniel by the collar and told him he'd be hearing from their lawyers. Her mother gathered the bridesmaids and ushered them out, shooting Daniel looks that could have melted steel. Most of the guests followed shortly after. Some left quietly, slipping out without saying goodbye. Others made a point of telling Daniel exactly what they thought of him on their way out. Coward, disgusting. How could you? The carefully curated image Daniel had spent years building, the perfect life he'd constructed with such care and calculation, crumbled in the space of a single afternoon. The string quartet stopped playing. The caterers began packing up the untouched food. The photographer packed away his camera, muttering about not getting paid enough for this kind of drama. And Daniel stood there in the middle of it all, alone, watching his world collapse. Vanessa called off the engagement 3 days later. She didn't even do it in person. She sent him a text message that simply said, "We're done. My father's lawyer will contact you about the ring and expenses." Don't try to call me. Within a week, word had spread through their entire social circle. Daniel's business partners began distancing themselves. Meetings were canceled. Phone calls weren't returned. His name, once synonymous with success and rising star, became a punchline. People whispered when he walked into rooms. The guy who abandoned his pregnant wife. Can you imagine? 3 kids, triplets, and he had no idea because he blocked her. What kind of person does that? His reputation, once spotless and shining, was now irreparably tarnished. And Daniel? He tried to reach out to Miriam. He sent text messages that went unanswered, emails that bounced back or were ignored. He sent flowers to her business address, which were returned with a note from her assistant saying, "Ms. Miriam does not wish to have contact with you." He showed up at her office once, desperate and disheveled, only to be turned away by security. He even tried to contact Dr. Hartman, thinking maybe she could mediate. But her office sent a polite but firm message saying she had no interest in involving herself in his personal affairs. Because Miriam didn't need him anymore. She never did, really. She'd built something real, something solid, while he'd been busy building an illusion. And she had no interest in letting him back into the life she'd worked so hard to create. 6 months later, Miriam's consulting firm landed a major contract with a national retail corporation, a deal worth millions. Her face appeared in a business magazine under the headline, "From Struggle to Success: How One Single Mother Built a Multi-million-dollar Empire." The article told her story, carefully omitting Daniel's name, but including enough details that everyone who knew the story understood exactly who the absent ex-husband was. It talked about her 3 sons, now enrolled in an excellent private school. It mentioned Dr. Hartman's mentorship in the nonprofit that had changed Miriam's trajectory. It showed photos of Miriam in her office, confident and smiling, surrounded by her team. And Daniel sitting alone in his overpriced apartment that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless, read that article over and over again. He studied the photos. He looked at his sons' faces in the background of one picture, seeing himself in their features, seeing all the birthdays and soccer games and bedtime stories he'd missed, seeing everything he'd thrown away because it didn't fit the image he wanted. Finally understanding the weight of what he had lost. And it wasn't just Miriam, it wasn't just his children, though that alone would have been devastating enough. It was the realization that he'd sacrificed something real for something fake, that he'd traded love and family for status and appearances, that he'd spent years climbing a ladder only to realize too late that it was leaning against the wrong wall. His apartment felt empty, his success felt hollow. The fancy car in his garage, the designer clothes in his closet, the expensive watch on his wrist, none of it meant anything anymore. Because there was no one to share it with. No one who cared. No one who even wanted to be around him. Here's the truth that no one wants to hear, but everyone needs to understand. You cannot outrun your choices. You cannot abandon people and expect no consequences. You can block phone numbers and change addresses and build new lives, but the truth has a way of catching up with you. Life has a way of holding up a mirror, forcing you to see who you really are beneath all the polish and pretense. And sometimes that mirror arrives in the form of the very person you tried to erase. Daniel thought he was upgrading his life, but all he did was downgrade his character. He traded loyalty for status, love for image, integrity for appearances, and in the end, he lost everything that actually mattered. He gained the whole world, or at least the version of it he thought he wanted, and lost his soul in the process. And now he sits alone, surrounded by expensive things, wondering if any of it was worth it, knowing deep down that it wasn't. Miriam, on the other hand, learned something far more valuable. She learned that your worth is not determined by who stays or who leaves. It's not determined by whether someone sees your value. It's determined by how you rise after you've been knocked down, by what you build when everything has been taken from you, by the strength you find when you're forced to be strong. And she rose higher than anyone ever expected. Not out of revenge, though the satisfaction of proving Daniel wrong must have been sweet, but out of resilience, out of love for her children, out of a refusal to let someone else's rejection define her story. She could have let his abandonment break her. Many people would have, but instead she let it forge her into something stronger. She took the pain and turned it into purpose. She took the rejection and turned it into resilience. And in doing so, she became the very thing Daniel thought she could never be: successful, independent, powerful. Her sons will grow up knowing their mother fought for them. They'll know she built an empire while raising them alone. They'll know she never gave up, even when giving up would have been easier. And they'll carry that strength with them for the rest of their lives. As for Daniel, he'll spend the rest of his life wondering what those boys look like as they grow, what their voices sound like, what their personalities are, whether they play sports or like music, whether they ask about him. He'll spend holidays alone, knowing that somewhere out there, his children are celebrating without him. He'll see fathers with their sons and feel that hollow ache of everything he threw away. And he'll have no one to blame but himself, because he made his choice. And choices, as we all eventually learn, have consequences. Now, I want to hear from you, and I really want you to think about this. If you were in Miriam's position, would you have gone to that wedding? Would you have exposed him like that? Or would you have stayed away and let him wonder? Do you think she did the right thing by bringing the children? Or should she have protected them from that situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to know how you would have handled it.